Hello, it is November 16th, 2024, and you are watching Political Dharma with Alan Zundell. Over the last more than a year, I've been covering the campaigns of alternative presidential candidates, that is, those candidates who are not the nominees of either of the major parties. And since the election is now over and has been over for what, a week or two, I think it's time to wrap that up and draw some lessons from what we've learned over the course of following these campaigns. And in general, try to relate that to my overarching theme of trying to challenge the two party system. Now, what is wrong with the two party system? And despite those who always say that it's a way of combating extremism and gaining stability, I don't think so. I think it really is a way of protecting very powerful financial interests who are able to gain influence over the two major parties because it is not possible to compete with those parties. Therefore, they only have two parties they have to try to own through lobbyists and campaign donations and all the methods they use to dominate each of those parties. Now, each of the party is somewhat different, but both of them are very beholden to the interest of major corporations or billionaires or those who wield influence outsized to the rest of us. So if we as the public feel like neither party is really serving our interest, at least in some important areas, we don't have a way to express that other than trying to vote for parties that are never going to get anywhere. So this two-party system is problematic, and there have been three routes to trying to challenge the two-party system, and I think this campaign has illustrated some of the problems with each of those to some extent anyway. The first one is trying to create a minor party to put pressure on the major parties to address particular issues, or maybe even to grow large enough to replace one of the major parties. And that has over and over proven to be a very difficult path to follow, especially in modern times, as the two parties do more and more to moats, erect moats or dig moats, dig moats and erect obstacles against challenges to the two-party system. They made ballot access laws even more stringent. They made the opportunity to get in a presidential debate more difficult. And as we've seen, they have legal challenges to minor parties even trying to get on the ballot. So people have the opportunity to consider them. So that's the first route, trying to build a minor party that can challenge the major parties and get them to change their stripes, at least to some degree. And then the second route is trying to work within one of the major parties to reform it and reshape it and have it address other issues. And we didn't see as much of that this time around, but I do think some indications are there of how this tends to pan out, especially with the candidacy of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and the success in Donald Trump winning this election and his dominance of three election cycles. And finally, the other alternative, once people in minor parties discover how hard it is to try to get people to vote for you, even if they like you, because they're afraid of causing a spoiler election, there is the route of trying to change our voting methods in order to make it more friendly to third parties, to allow people to more easily vote for them if they really like them, and then to build from there. Show you have support and that it's growing so more people will consider you. And there's a snowball effect. And the leading voting reform method has been ranked choice voting for maybe 30 years now. And open primaries, so-called open primaries, have been another method that have taken off in maybe the last 10, 15 years. So those have been on the ballot as well. So we'll talk about that. But let's start out with just reviewing my coverage of this election. I started way back in June, and my intention was to cover the presidential election because that's where most people are interested in politics, and that's what I talk about here is mostly politics from my particular standpoint. And it was back in June that Cornel West accepted the nomination of the People's Party. And I thought that was an interesting development because Cornel West is fairly well known, especially in certain circles. Certainly not something the general public, someone the general public would be real aware of, but in politically active circles on the left, yes, definitely Cornel West is a known person, a well-known author, best-selling author, I think, and an academic and a public intellectual who's appeared on media numerous times and given interviews and given talks around the country. So I thought that was an interesting development to start with, and thought he should hook up with a minor party rather than the People's Party, which is not much of a party. And he did do what I suggested, not at my suggestion, but of those of other people who know him, to join the Green Party. And that's where I started doing more coverage of the Green Party, which I know fairly well. And then it was in October of last year that both Cornel West, who had been running for the nomination of the Green Party, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who had been running for the nomination of the Democratic Party, decided to go as independents. Now, I have to say this is not a completely terrible decision, because independent candidates are more attractive to voters than candidates who have a party label behind them, at least a minor party label behind them, because they regard them as what, free of the dominance of some kind of organized interest or narrow political viewpoint, something like that. But voters do seem to respond to the label of independent better, although it's a very hard road to travel in a presidential election because of the difficulty getting on the ballot in different states. And that's what we followed here for a long, long time, battles to get on the ballot by the Green Party, Libertarian Party, especially Kennedy, and all the things that the Democrats did to try to keep people off the ballot, Republicans too, to some degree. And that was where that was. And then later when was that? I think it was November. Yeah, there it is. November is when I started talking about the possibility of a realignment in the major party composition. Now, that would be the second method of trying to change parties and put pressure on parties, is to cause them to change from within by putting pressure from without, combined method. But anyway, I thought that there was a possibility that Kennedy's campaign, which was taking off and getting a lot of interest, and he was rising in the polls, would make a difference in trying to change the composition of the two major parties if he was able to gain enough electoral votes or a high enough popular vote that the parties would have to in some way try to respond to that in future elections. So that's how it looked early on. I thought it was a slight possibility of realignment, instigated by Kennedy, but I also thought we were overdue for a realignment. All right, so what else after that? Well, the outcome of the election for minor parties was not terrific. Let's pull up the Ballotpedia vote totals here. And as we look down there, Jill Stein of the Green Party got about 0.5% of the vote. That's half of 1%. And Kennedy, he suspended his campaign and endorsed Donald Trump, which gave him an opportunity to have influence within the administration that's coming in. But that was his gamble, and it paid off. But some people still voted for him while where he was on the ballot, and he only got 0.5%. And can't really judge much by that because we don't know how much he would have gotten if he had stayed in the race. Chase Oliver of the Libertarian Party, even lower at 0.4%. Claudia Dela Cruz of the Party for Socialism and Liberation, 0.1%. And then it's down here from there. Cornel West only got 70,200 votes as of the last count, which is pretty much complete by now. And that's about 0% of the vote when you calculate that total voter population is somewhere in the realm of 150 million. So the minor parties did bad this year, even though it seemed like a banner year as we started out for people dissatisfied with the two major parties. It seemed like a banner year for minor parties to actually build on their vote in previous elections. But at least some of the candidates learned some lesson from this very late in the campaign. And this is a video I did just before the election where Claudia Dela Cruz negotiated with both Cornel West and Jill Stein of the Green Party to say that they would make an arrangement where if one of those candidates was not on the ballot in a state and the other candidate was, that the one who was not on the ballot would encourage their supporters to vote for the candidate who was on the ballot. So it's kind of a combining of left-wing candidates and forces to try to get them to cooperate and help one another to a very minor extent. But they also said they were going to try to do this after the election as well, to build on this foundation, to find a way to build a left-wing minor party force that would have more influence on the election. But going back to the vote totals, though, if you added their vote all together, Jill Stein's 0.5%, Claudia De La Cruz at 0.1%, and Cornel West, even if you had Cornel West 70,000 votes, it doesn't add anything to the percentage-wise. They still have about 0.6% of the vote in this election. Maybe in a future election, there'd be more opportunity for them to get a higher number, which Jill Stein in the past has gotten a much higher number. But it's not promising that they're only getting less than 1% of the vote combined. So maybe they could do something like combine forces with the Democratic Socialists of America, who have generally been supporting socialists running under the label of the Democratic Party and mostly winning at the local level, not so much doing things at the national or even the state legislative level as much. But they could build their forces with those as well. But I doubt that getting all the left-wing forces, and by left I mean the towards the Democratic Socialist and Socialist side of the spectrum about politics and the economy. I'm not necessarily talking about representational issues, gender or race or ethnicity or national origin or that stuff. I'm not including the Democrats, in other words, in this left coalition. But if they did that, I still don't think it would be big enough to make a significant impact on the outcome. What about the Libertarian Party? Well, they did significantly worse this year than they had in previous years. Chase Oliver of the Libertarian Party only got 0.41% of the vote, as I said, which is much lower than the last, 3 elections going back, at least 3 presidential elections and probably farther. And they did have quite a fight going on internally. So not only did they probably lose votes to the competition between Harris and Trump, but they also lost votes because internally there was a caucus, the Mises caucus, that was more favorable to Donald Trump than other libertarians. And there was a split there, a big fight over who would be the nominee. They went through several rounds of voting, and Chase Oliver emerged not as the favorite of everybody. But on the other side of this was the party chair, Angela McArdle, and she now says that they are in dialogue with Donald Trump on a possible cabinet appointment for a libertarian. Now, by libertarian, I don't know if they mean a member of the Libertarian Party or a former Libertarian Party candidate, or just somebody who self-identifies as libertarian or has views that this faction of the Libertarian Party would regard as sufficiently libertarian to claim them as their own. So they did parlay this fight within the party into some kind of indication to Trump that they were trying to help him out. Maybe that was the plan all along. I don't know about their internal politics deeply enough to say that for sure, but it sure looked like there were some friendly forces to the MAGA movement that wanted to help Donald Trump and also help Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is not exactly a libertarian, although some of his views correspond with theirs in certain areas. So anyway, they think they're going to get a libertarian appointment of the cabinet. Maybe they will. Maybe that transaction did help them, but it certainly didn't help their vote, and it didn't help the party grow or raise money or anything like that that it would need to survive in the world going forward. So that's where things were with the minor parties. What about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the most prominent alternative candidate through most of the last year, most of this year, most of this campaign season? He got up into the double digits in the polling of voters who said they would vote for him if the election were held today. But then that tapered off as the media started finding ways to continually critique Kennedy and use labels that scare people off, like anti-vax and vaccine skeptic, which they still do, and which I think is an unfair type label. Not that there's nothing there that they could focus on as being outside the so-called mainstream, but he's not anti-vaccines and he's not a skeptic of the efficacy of vaccines overall. I don't think. I think it would be more appropriate to call him something like anti-big drug company or anti corporate capture of the regulatory agencies of the health agencies of the United States government. Anyway, that's a side. Anyway, they started to slur him and he lost ground. And then As it came closer to the election, as it often happens, people started to think, well, my real choices are the Democrat or Republican, and started gravitating in that direction. And then when Joe Biden dropped out of the nomination of the Democratic Party and Kamala Harris came in, there was a bit of enthusiasm for Harris and a bit of more interest in the race. So that probably pulled more people out of the Kennedy orbit. He decided to suspend his campaign and endorse Trump. And I think in retrospect, what happened with Donald Trump over the last three election cycles is he definitely precipitated a realignment in the Republican Party. It looked like cracks were forming when he ran in 2016. He got to be the nominee by a fluke in the voting system early on in the primaries because someone with the most votes gets the most media attention as the quote unquote winner, even though they didn't get anywhere near a majority. Trump got through that process in a couple of early primary elections with somewhere around 30% of the vote, not a majority, but the vote among the other candidates, and there were a lot of candidates, was split up so badly, and they couldn't gather together their forces to overcome Trump. They all were freelancing on their own. So unlike the Democratic Party, which closed ranks against Bernie Sanders in 2016, which was a year in which people were very interested in outsider candidates who wanted to break apart the cozy functioning of the political system, the two-party system. Donald Trump was the change candidate in the Republican Party, and it was much less successful in keeping him out. And Bernie Sanders was kept out of the Democratic Party nomination by their combination of forces and coming out against him. Excuse me. So, and there was a very high vote total for the minor party candidates that year for both Green Party, Jill Stein, and Libertarian candidate Gary Johnson. So it showed that there was a lot of interest in outsider candidates and shaking up the political system on the part of voters. And Donald Trump was able to exploit weaknesses within the Republican primary process and the Republican Party to pose a significant challenge to it and start the possibility of a real realignment. Although when he was in office, he had to battle forces of the traditional Republican establishment and didn't have total control of the party. He worked after his a loss of the election in 2020, and I know there are those of you who think he did not lose the election, but we've had Joe Biden at least acting like the president for the last 4 years, in which time Donald Trump was able to consolidate his control over the apparatus of the Republican Party by putting people in place in the various state parties and local positions so that they were able to make sure that he won his nomination here in 2024. And as it turns out, he won the election so that his control over the Republican Party and the change in the forces behind the party, the change in the forces that control the major levers of power in the party, like prominent seats within the national government, the presidency, and probably the Speaker of the House is a Trump loyalist now. And in the Senate, they just elected someone majority leader. I don't think he's a Trump loyalist. I'm not sure. Anyway, awful lot of people in Congress now are Trump loyalists, and he's going to bring people into the administration who are going to be Trump loyalists and within the MAGA coalition. And then they've got a lot of those groups outside supporting them. So there it has been a realignment in the Republican Party, and it wasn't that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. precipitated it, but by participating in the coalition supporting Trump, I think he did have at least some influence on the outcome of what was a very, very close election in the swing states. And had he not been there, it may have been otherwise. Maybe, maybe not. People have challenged my assertion on this, but he certainly did help Trump gain the number of votes they needed to win this election by very narrow victories in most of the swing states. So by joining that ongoing realignment, Kennedy helped solidify it in the Republican Party. And we don't know really how the shape of it is going to look now that Kennedy is been promised a position in the administration. I'm sure you've heard this. So that is put a story up here. This is from Politico, I think was the first news agency. No, this is from the Associated Press, and they got this from Politico that Kennedy was being seriously considered for being the head of the Health and Human Services Department, which is a cabinet level position. And then subsequently, Donald Trump did announce that this was his choice for the head of Health and Human Services. but he has to get confirmed by the Senate. We don't know if that's going to work, but certainly he's going to have some role in the administration. There's a lot of positions. If he doesn't get this, if he doesn't get by the Senate, he can still be appointed to positions that are purely presidential appointments, and he could have the ear of the president. Don't know yet what kind of influence he's going to have, but certainly Trump is putting him out there as someone he wants on his team. And then I found this article in Politico, a follow up on his nomination, was that the lobbyists in Washington, D.C. are frenzied and frantic over this nomination. They are very concerned about Kennedy's vow to get the influence of pesticide companies and major agricultural firms and how they're using the soil, and also the pharmaceutical companies' influence over the FDA, the Federal Food and Drug Administration. All these things are worrying a heck of a lot of lobbyists because Kennedy promised to get corporate influence out of these important agencies that have to do with public health. And now they are trying to hold back their fire because they're afraid they will antagonize Kennedy. And they hope to defeat him quietly in the Senate confirmation process. But failing that, they're going to try to sidle up to him and gain favor with him in order to try to influence him in some way. That will be an interesting fight to watch for sure. All right, so that is on that second one. Realignments sometimes do happen. In Trump's case, I don't think it was because of outside pressure from a particular minor party, although I do think the ability of the Libertarian Party to get a high number of votes in 2016 was a sign that maybe he should seek out some support from the Libertarian Party, and that apparently had some effect because the Libertarian Party were a lot of people angling to get a candidate who would be Trump friendly and maybe even drop out at the last minute and endorse Trump as Kennedy did. And they were they took a hit, and as I said earlier, in the party in terms of strengthening their own party, but they're possibly going to be able to get Trump in. So both Robert Kennedy and some faction of the Libertarian Party joining forces with the coalition is some indication of a realignment as well. It's not they precipitated it all by themselves, but they were certainly factors within this election that solidified this realignment. Democratic Party is much less open to change right now, I would say, even though they lost this election and they lost all the swing states. So there's a lot of soul searching and brain racking going on within the party. The early signs that they're going to follow the same path and insist that pursuing the center rather than talking about the troubles of the working class voter are the ticket to future electoral victories. Don't know how they're going to respond. I think they're going to be more resistance to change and going to find out that that's not a good path to go on. And eventually we'll have to change. In what ways? Hard to tell. It'll be interesting to see the juxtaposition of a possible progressive socialist minor party combination with the DSA and then a Democratic Party that's trying to find itself again. Is that outside force going to be forcing them to wake up that they're losing a significant part of their base, that is the progressive part of their base, to the possibility of an outside force? Don't know how that's going to play out, but that'll be interesting to watch as well. But what I would say though is it's hard to get a realignment going. Here there may be an opportunity and some people may want to pursue that. But I think even though there are realignments, it is not necessarily going to change the most important part of what the parties are doing, which is just catering to the whims of more wealthy class, especially the Democrats. They have a lot of corporate backers in their party. In the Republican Party, Donald Trump took a lot of money from billionaires. He's more of a free agent, but he has shown himself in the past to be very friendly to the influence of big money outsiders. We'll see how that plays out, but I am skeptical that either party is going to do things like really significantly reducing the defense budget and our expenditures in adventures abroad, funding war in other countries, and then moving towards helping people in our own country in ways that they're really going to feel. Um, his whole talk about tariffs, I think, will probably have the reversed effect on inflation that people are wanting to see. Anyway, this is all speculation on my part. Obviously, just have to wait and see how that turns out. And if you're interested in trying to realign the Democratic Party, more power to you. But the third way of trying to get a change in our two-party system has been uh, uh, trying to change the way we vote. And this is mostly through citizens' initiatives because people who win office are not interested in changing the way you get into office for reasons that should be obvious. But there were over a half a dozen statewide ballot measures across the country to change to either ranked choice voting or open primaries or some combination thereof. Here is a slide that shows how much money was behind this movement. Now, I don't know where this money is coming from right now, but the blue shows how much money was pro voting method reform, and the red shows that there was um, uh, how much money was spent opposing these measures. But you would expect with this kind of money and with the restlessness of voters, maybe these things would have done well. But unfortunately, no, they did very badly. Here's a chart showing that just about all these things were rejected. So Oregon's ranked choice voting measure was rejected. Nevada's open primary plus 5 going to a ranked choice election, that was rejected. Colorado was rejected. Idaho was rejected. All these open primary in Montana was rejected. Alaska, they had a vote to repeal their open primary plus ranked choice voting, but that is still in the process of being counted. In fact, I think it was just yesterday evening that this story came out from Alaska Public Radio, that it's very close right now. The yes vote, which would mean yes to repeal the open primary ranked choice voting system, is still ahead, but it's very narrow. They have like 50.3% to 49.7% and are ahead by just about 1,676 votes and still counting. But the closer it gets to finishing counting, more likely it is that this is going to stay the same. All right, I've talked about each of these, and you see minor parties, very difficult to get traction, very difficult to build your party, especially with all the disadvantages of our voting system and how the major parties are antagonistic towards them and in the position of passing laws that disadvantage minor parties. Realignments are hard to do from outside if you can't build a big enough force, but a combination of forces could potentially do that. That's very hard to get forces together, and I'm not sure that if on the left there's enough backing to actually do that. Maybe, but the initiatives to change voting methods have not done well at all. So, what is the alternative? Where do we go from here? And this is what I've been promising for quite a while. Here, I'm just going to give you a sketchy outline and then in future shows fill it in a little more. But I think what happens a lot with minor parties is they feel like they have to take a particular ideological position or a set of policy issues and use that as their identity to try to advance a particular agenda. And I think voters in general are leery of parties that have an agenda. They want something that's a little more open to different positions. They're not sure what they want. I mean, combine all the minor party voters, even in the highest numbers in the last 30 years or so, is not a very big segment of the public. But voters who do not register with the major parties are a big segment of the public, and voters who express an interest in a third party do represent I think, a majority now of the voting public. So there is a opportunity for this, but people are for some reason not turning to the current minor parties. And I think it's because of their narrow ideological focus. The general strategy has been to define your party and then to try to persuade people over to it and build over time. And I think what happens is because the voting system is so rigged against minor parties that you lose your opportunity to convince people that your ideology is even a good one. Why would they listen if you're going to lose election after election after election? They start to see your whole um, program as being marginal because people don't vote for it. So it stigmatizes you. What I think we need is something like a political party that, depending on states, because state laws make it either more advantageous or less to be a political party as opposed to a political organization that's not listed as an official party, but a party like organization in which its only positions really are number one, being an alternative to the two major parties, and number two, having an internal process that models a good democratic process where people who want to see an alternative to the two major parties can participate in choosing to nominate or endorse candidates for election who just appeal to whatever the majority of that coalition is. And it can change over time because it's not restricted to considering candidates who are just in alignment with their ideology. By using something like star voting, which I think is a big improvement over ranked choice voting, you could both find candidates who have broad and strong support within all the people who participate in this coalition. You could also model how well star voting would work in the larger system, where we can't get voters to change the voting system. We can give them the experience and the illustration of what such a system could look like by actually using it internally if you could do it on a wide scale. If you could get a lot of people who are not affiliated with the major parties and you exclude major party candidates from consideration, I think you could really demonstrate what people are looking for and how they could do it differently to actually have those voters get a voice in this system. Now, I think people would be kind of curious, well, what does this party stand for, or where are they going? What kind of people are joining it? And to illustrate that, I think you also need to have a way of demonstrating a platform. But unlike the way parties do it today, you would not have people who are highly active in the party being the ones who vote on party planks. And then even if the vote is narrow and the number of people participating is very small, it becomes a plank that then has to be taken away at some point. I think what you have to have is periodic votes to just demonstrate a sense of the voters in that coalition about particular issues. That is, activists of whatever stripe, say you're members of the Green Party or Libertarian Party, or you got some other position and you want to participate in this coalition, you could promote your positions and then have a vote that just lists it as a sense of the party, not something that everybody is bound to or obligated to, but this is kind of where people stand on things. And then list along with that, that this is the number of people who actually voted, and this is the number who voted for and against that party plank to give a sense of how strong that coalition is on that particular issue. That would be information for the public to judge the composition of this party-like organization rather than having it bound to a particular position. It could always be flexible and change from year to year as you went through this process of number one, choosing which party planks you're going to vote on and then doing the vote and then putting it out in the public along with the votes for and against and the total vote. And then, endorsing or nominating candidates for election with a process that's going to consider people from a wide spectrum of views. So I think that's a way possibly to get people from different perspectives and people who are leery of being committed to one narrow perspective that at least that looks narrow to them. And it also allows a way for the more ideologically committed, like me, to participate in trying to persuade people to accept particular candidates or to accept particular platform positions and have to convince a wide swathe of people that these are things worth voting for, not just convince people within your own ideological universe, but convince people that come from all kinds of positions that are not going to be excluded by the party. You have to learn to make your case to people who don't think exactly like you, in other words, which is how the political system should be working. All right, that's good enough for today. Give you an overview of what I took away from this election and my coverage of it over the last more than a year, and an idea of where I'm going from here. I'll probably be doing more interviews going forward. I'm not going to cover so much what's going on with the major parties. I'll be looking at some of that, especially to see how the Republican Party shapes up as the Trump administration moves forward, and how the Democratic Party, if it starts to change, or if there's a movement to make a consolidated progressive movement outside the party. I'll be watching that kind of stuff, but not the day-to-day ins and outs of the major party bickering, because you got plenty of media to cover that. And unless it's something that really fits the agenda I've established for this channel, I'm not going to do that. Oh, I did want to mention one thing that I think way back when I did that, I had that one video about Cornel West. He put that up, and if you noticed, it said Cornel West for president and crashed UFOs. That was a topic back before I started this channel. I was kind of casting about for things that I thought were worth talking about. I didn't seize upon UFOs just because they're interesting in themselves or for clickbait to some degree. Yes, that, the latter, but also because it says a lot about government cover-ups and government failures and how they treat the public and our ability to assimilate the truth about whatever is going on out there. I did want to mention that this week there was another congressional hearing about these unidentified aerial phenomena, as they're now calling them, UAPs. And there's a lot of strange things out there. So just throw that out there for you. I'm not going to be covering that. I'm not doing that to say that that's going to be a major focus of my coverage, but I'll be doing more interviews. I'll be looking at changes in the third parties and realignments within the major parties possibly, and also this idea. I'm going to try to establish a chapter of this kind of a party here in California. If you're interested, let me know and we'll maybe talk about it. Or if you just want to talk about this in the comments below this video, please do. Let me know your reactions to what I had to say and challenge my ideas, find their weak points, whatever, I'm open to what you have to say. So likes, shares, comments, all that's appreciated as usual. And we'll be heading into the end of the year. Then next year, see how these plans form. All right. So thanks again for watching and goodbye until next week when I will have sometime earlier midweek an interview with Sarah Wolk of the Equal Vote Coalition, who's going to be talking with me about these failed voting reform initiatives and what she thinks happened there because she's been following it even more closely than I have. So can look forward to that next week. All right, bye.
With ease, I see the chains are breaking. We gained our focus, the moves we're making will prove to determine our self-worth as a passenger on this vehicle Earth.